Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight our experiment continues as we present several episodes of something I'm sure most of you remember but haven't seen in years. Our Gang. Our Gang, aka the Little Rascals, and more about that later, were one of the mainstays of my childhood along with Warner Brothers cartoons and the Three Stooges. I used to come home from school for lunch and watch the Captain Penny show, and he'd show Our Gang and Three Stooges shorts every day, along with warnings not to do the things the Three Stooges did, before signing off with, remember, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool Mom. She's pretty nice and she's pretty smart, so you listen to Mom and you won't go far wrong. I thought this was an original thought that Captain Penny came up with until I read the original quote from Abraham Lincoln and realized that it was tempered with yet another quote from Spanky, which you'll see in a bit. Before I start, I need to tell you a couple of things. First of all, with this new format we're trying on, I'm going to be pressed a bit for time, so I fear I'm going to have to forgo the bios for this intro. I'll try to fit one or two in, but I can't promise anything as I'm limited to a 2-hour block. Also, and most importantly, I must give credit where it's due for the information I'm about to impart here. All of it comes from the excellent Our Gang, The Life and Times of the Little Rascals by Leonard Maltin and Richard W. Bann. If you're a fan of the Our Gang comedies, this is without a doubt the book to buy. It's an absolutely exhaustive history of the gang from inception to demise with incredible detail paid to every aspect of the series. And it's amazingly readable, a completely entertaining book. If you're interested, you should be able to find it with no problem at Amazon.com. The Our Gang shorts were made by the Hal Roach Studios, one of the two studios in Hollywood that specialized in nothing but comedy. The other was the Max Sennett Studios. The Our Gang comedies were conceived in 1921 when movies were filled with slapstick comedy. The actors, both adult and child, were heavily made up with pancake eyeliner and false eyelashes and lipstick, mostly owing to the relatively poor quality of the film stock available at the time. The makeup was needed for contrast. The camera was often undercranked for comic effect, meaning that the film was exposed and run through the gate slower to achieve a faster speed when projected at a normal frame rate. You have to remember that cameras were cranked by hand at that time as camera motors were unreliable. Cameramen had different ways of filming at 24 frames per second, and most of them either counted 101 or memorized a piece of music whose tempo matched the pace needed. Hal Roach, the head of the studio, got the idea for Our Gang after having just finished Watch a Little Girl audition. He remembered, one time for an audition, a woman brought an over-rehearsed little girl into me. The kid came in all made up and I had to listen to her speak some kind of piece, do a dance, and sing a song. The kid thought she was a child prodigy, but all she could do was what they trained her to do. I was unimpressed. When she finally left, I walked over to the window. There's a lumber yard across the street, and out of my window I saw this bunch of 5 or 6 little kids. They had picked up these sticks of lumber and they began arguing over them. Now this amused me. The little kid claimed the biggest stick and the oldest kid wanted it. Now they were going to throw the sticks away as soon as they walked another block, but the most important thing in the world right then was who could have which stick. All of a sudden I realized I'd been watching this silly argument over sticks for 15 minutes. I'd spent 15 minutes because these are real kids. I mean, they're on the square. They're just kids being kids. So I thought if I could find some clever street kids just to play themselves in films and show life from a kid's angle, maybe I could make a dozen of these things before I wear out the idea. Deciding to run with the concept, Roach began casting about for kids to play the gang. He started by casting a young black boy named Ernie Morrison, who had been appearing in the Harold Lloyd and Snub Pollard comedies the studio had been making. He then hired a couple of kids he saw in Marshall Nealon's film Penrod, Jackie Condon and Peggy Cartwright. Jackie Davis, the younger brother of one of Roach's leading ladies, Mildred Davis, was next, and studio still photographer Gene Corman brought his daughter Mary in and recommended a friend's son, Mickey Daniels. According to studio publicity, a little boy named Alan Hoskins followed Ernie Morrison to the studio one day and walked into a 10-year job as Farina. A few shorts in, Joe Cobb joined the gang and the ensemble was complete. Having faith in his idea, he assigned his best talent to the project. Charlie Chase was named Director General, and Hiram Beanie Walker, a cartoonist, was hired to write the title cards and later the scripts. Charlie Olsey was a circus and rodeo performer who had made friends with Roach while he was in charge of corralling hopeful extras in 1913. When Roach opened his own studio, he brought in some of his old friends, including future directors George Marshall, Fred Neumeyer, and Harold Lloyd. Olsey came in as a prop man and used his genius to build all the gadgets the gang eventually used in their shorts. Bob McGowan was a retired fireman from Denver, Colorado, who had moved to Hollywood and ended up working with Charlie Olsey at Universal. He came to Roach as a gag man and eventually worked his way up to director. He had a natural rapport with children and became their best director, finding the best way to get the kids to act naturally was to make something of a game out of the filmmaking process. Now, before we get started, there's something I should touch on. The Curse of the Little Rascals. My good friend Darren Sylvester asked me about that when I told him I was doing an Our Gang show. So let's deal with this now. Let me say at the outset, there is no curse of the Little Rascals. While it's true that several of the members of the gang met untimely deaths, the idea of a curse is absurd. What happened to some of the members of the gang has happened hundreds of times before and since. Children achieve stardom, and as they grow old, their appeal disappears with their age. Some learn to handle it, some don't. For every victim of the so-called curse, there were a dozen that went on to lead normal, productive lives. Darla Hood, for instance, became a singer and a voiceover artist. Spanky McFarland became a salesman for Philco, and Tommy Bond, who played Butch, retired from acting to take a job behind the camera as a producer. What everyone remembers, however, is how Alfalfa died. There are conflicting accounts of how this happened. He was either shot over an argument over a $50 debt or it was at a dope burn. But it was either self-defense or flat-out murder. No one will ever know the truth, I suppose, but of such things are curses born. It doesn't help that Scotty Beckett died of a drug overdose and Stymie ended up shooting heroin either. But things like Weezer Hutchins being killed in an Army training accident and Froggy McLaughlin getting killed in a motor scooter accident don't exactly fit the idea of a curse. They were just accidents. What is true about this whole thing is that the history of Hollywood is stained by stories just like these ones. The entertainment industry is rough, and when you've outlived your usefulness, Hollywood treats you as if you never existed. It's something I think everyone knows when they go in, but for a former star, walking away from a pampered lifestyle like that is something that's just too hard to deal with, and I imagine it's 10 times tougher when you're a kid. Okay, now on to better subjects. The first short, entitled Our Gang, was released on November 5th, 1922. No prints of the short are known to exist, and today it's considered a lost film. The short we're going to kick off the show with is the 14th one made, entitled Dogs of War. It starts with the great battle of Kelly's Tomato Patch and ends up on the grounds of the Hal Roach studio, with the gang making their own version of a movie. This is one of the silent Our Gang comedies. 89 of them were made before sound came in. And I'm opening with this one, not only because it's a funny film, it's a fascinating example of what the gang was like before the advent of all the kids we're familiar with. I'll be back in about 20 minutes. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Our Gang in Dogs of War, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema. The next short is from the early sound area of the Our Gang series and includes a number of more familiar faces. Jackie Cooper, Bobby Weezer Hutchins, Norman Chubby Chaney, Marianne Jackson, a slightly older Alan Farina Hoskins, Matthew Stymie Beard, and every boy's fantasy teacher, June Marlowe, as Miss Crabtree. Love Business is the third short featuring June Marlowe and is one of my favorites. It's the one where Miss Crabtree moves in with Jackie's family as a boarder, which creates a slight problem, as Jackie has a hopeless crush on his teacher. Unfortunately, so does Chubby, who until this time had been wooing Marianne, who's jealous. The only one who's relieved she's coming to live there is Weezer, because he sleeps with Jack and gets the brunt of Jack's fevered dreams concerning his teacher. Here's 1931's Love Business. The next short jumps ahead a year and introduces someone who will forever be associated with Our Gang, and Our Gang will be associated with George Robert Phillips McFarland. He was nicknamed Spanky because that's what his mother would threaten him with to keep him out of mischief. Spanky, Spanky, mustn't touch, she'd warn. He was born in Dallas, Texas, and was all of 3 years old when he made his debut in this short. His aunt mailed a modeling photo of him to Hal Roach, who immediately arranged for a screen test. It was shot by James Horn, and actress Dorothy Granger remembered when it was first shown. She said Horn roamed around the studio, grabbing everyone he could find, and said, "You've got to see this." The test footage was of Spanky playing in a bathtub and was subsequently used in the next short released, 1932's Spanky. Everyone who saw it fell in love with the kid, and he was hurriedly written into the next upcoming short, 1932's Free Eats. To quote Leonard Maltin, "Though he's barely able to articulate words in Free Eats, Tiny Spanky is featured in an extraneous and protracted scene in which Breezy asks him questions about going to the lawn party that afternoon. Somehow the discussion drifts into a yarn Spanky tells about horses, airplanes, monkeys, swings, and rats. The raison d'etre for this sequence is obvious: to stand still and focus attention on this remarkable, beguiling youngster who is bursting with energy and imagination, and even better, is absolutely unconscious of the camera." I can't say it any better, and I sure as hell would have never used a term like raison d'etre either. The short also features Kendall Breezy Brisbane McComas, Dorothy DeBorba, and Sherwood Spud Bailey. If you're wondering what this short is about, I can sum it up in one word: fidgets. Here's 1932's Free Eats. Our last short tonight is 1935's Anniversary Troubles. Spanky's parents are played by Claudia Dell and Johnny Arthur, who brought his fussy, effete character to the Roach studio in the 1920s and starred in his own series of shorts throughout the 20s and 30s. He's a great comic actor, but as Leonard Maltin pointed out in his book, one of the things that doesn't make sense in this short is why Spanky's mother, who's very likable and pretty cool, Spanky obviously takes after her, would marry a knucklehead like Johnny Arthur to begin with. In addition, keep an eye out for Hattie McDaniel, who would win an Oscar 4 years later for her role in 1939's Gone with the Wind as Buckwheat's mom. In another interesting bit of casting, Leonard Kybrick, who usually plays a bully in the R Gang shorts, is cast off-type here as a member of the gang. Now, before I go on, I'm going to have to touch on something that some people may have a problem with, and it's the fact that Spanky disguises himself as Buckwheat in order to escape the gang, who's after him because they think he stole the membership dues of the Ancient and Honorary Order of the Woodchucks Club. High sign. I know I've said this before, and I'm forced to say it again because of this nonsense currently permeating this country called political correctness. Don't worry, I'm not going to go off on it again, even though I'm tempted to. You all know how I feel about it, and I already know just about all of you agree with me. But I do have to warn you about what could be construed as racist material in this short. I will again have to remind you that this short was made during a period in the history of this country when racial humor was the norm rather than the exception, and it was an accepted part of life. The humor used in this short is guileless. It's not meant to insult or mock anyone. It is meant and used as a joke and nothing more. Now, if there's a chance that this will hurt your little feelings or insult you, go to bed. If, however, you possess a sense of humor along with a sense of history and common sense, keep watching, because this is one of the funniest shorts Hal Roach Studios ever made. Here's 1930. Well, that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you have any questions or comments, as it says right down here, please write to me at clevelandclassics@hotmail.com. Let me know what you think of the movies we broadcast or the new format of whatever is on your mind concerning the show. Any feedback is appreciated. Thanks for watching, and come back again anytime. I'm always happy to have you join me. Have a good night, and we'll see you next week right here on Cleveland Classics Cinema. Good night.